Unitarian Church of Alton. I'm Reverend Krista Taves, the minister of this congregation, and I thank you all for being here today, those of you here in our sanctuary and those of you with us online. In this congregation, we strive to be outward reaching and inward seeking. Our mission is to create and nurture an intentional community that values acceptance, social justice, and the embodiment of Unitarian Universalist principles. If you're new to Unitarian Universalism, these can be found on the front of the gray hymnal or in a Google search. You are welcome here in the fullness of who you are, the fullness of your gender, class, culture, racialized experience, sexual orientation, family structure, and religious background. We ask that you offer this welcome to others as it is offered to you. If you are a guest, a special welcome to you. I hope that your experience is rich and meaningful and that we'll see you again. If you're visiting us online, please let us know that you're here. Our email is on the front page of our website, and then we can welcome you personally. If you're here in our sanctuary, please join us after service for coffee hour. We would love to get to know you, and please do sign the guest book before you leave so that we can stay in touch. Now I would invite Joy to offer our prelude. In the Unitarian Universalist tradition, we light a chalice to symbolize that we have entered sacred space and are preparing our hearts and minds for the blessing of beloved community that happens whenever we are together. I invite you to join with me in our prayer as we light our chalice. We hallow this time together by kindling the lamp of our heritage. Our opening words are by Reverend Leslie Takahashi. Here in this place of peace, may we find hope. Here in this place of connection, may we find life-giving community. Here in this place of rest, let the unrest of our hearts turn us toward justice. Here in this space made sacred by memories of connection, let us each feel ourselves part of the new that grows from the old in the spiraling unity of years. I invite you to rise as you are able in body or spirit for Guide My Feet, our opening hymn. Peace has triumphed, hope is triumphed, over the way, on the road from free to liberty, love will guide us through the hard night. Please be seated. Our time for ages today is a poem that many of us who are Gen X would have grown up with. Many of us who had Gen X kids would have told Shel Silverstein's stories over and over and over again. And today, we're going to do one of the most favorite, wildest poems of his. Sarah Cynthia Sylvia Stout would not take the garbage out. How many of you know this poem or have heard this poem? Quite a few of you. It's a little energetic, so just let you know that. Sarah Cynthia Sylvia Stout would not take the garbage out. She'd scour the pots and scrape the pans, candy the yams and spice the hands, and though her daddy would scream and shout, she simply would not take the garbage out. And so it piled up to the ceilings, coffee grounds, potato peelings, brown bananas, rotten peas, chunks of sour cottage cheese. It filled the can, it covered the floor, it cracked the window, and blocked the door with bacon rinds and chicken bones, drippy ends of ice cream cones, prune pits, peach pits, orange peel, gloppy glumps of cold oatmeal, pizza crusts and withered greens, soggy beans and tangerines, crusts of black burned buttered toast, gristly bits of beefy roasts. The garbage rolled on down the hall. It raised the roof. It broke the wall. Greasy napkins, cookie crumbs, gobs of gooey bubble gum, cellophane from green bologna, rubbery, blubbery macaroni, peanut butter caked in dry curdled milk and crust of pie. Moldy melons, dried up mustard, eggshells mixed with lemon custard, cold French fries and rancid meat, yellow clumps of cream of wheat. At last the garbage piled so high that it finally touched the sky, and all the neighbors moved away, and none of her friends would come to play. And finally, Sarah Cynthia Stout said, "Okay, I will take the garbage out." But then, of course, it was too late. The garbage reached across the state from New York to the Golden Gate. And there in the garbage she did hate. Poor Sarah met an awful fate that I cannot right now relate, because the hour is much too late. But children, remember Sarah Stout, and always take the garbage out. And that is the end of the Time for All Ages. We are a caring community where we share the joys which lift our hearts and the sorrows which bring us pain. As part of our worship service, we always take time for the expression of joys, concerns, or sorrows. There are stones at the back and here in front. When the music begins, you are invited to come forward as you wish. Take a stone to represent whatever is in your heart or thoughts and place it in the bowl of water, which represents this beloved community. And if you have mobility issues, please raise your hand and we'll drop a stone for you. And if you're watching from home, you're welcome to place a stone in the water. And let's have the children go first so they can go to their class. Let us begin. We hope and pray that the joys represented by these stones will double, and that the sorrows and concerns will be halved. May they be held in the crucible of this beloved community as we are here for each other, now and always. Our reading this morning is by Ted Loder. However much we talk about our longing for change in ourselves and the world, the actual prospect of that change and the cost of it in terms of engaging in battle with the powers of conformity produces some ambivalence at best. Ambivalence generates resistance. It's hard to get carried away when we're hanging on tightly to the familiar. Please remain seated for our meditative hymn number 391, Voice Still and Small. Today, we're talking about resistance. We've actually talked quite a bit about resistance in the last few messages I've given. Our Easter message was about the resistance of Mary Magdalene. We've also talked about the resistance to inclusion, the resistance also to oppression, and how we resist and stand or move in opposition to those things that would dehumanize it. And there are times when that kind of resistance is exactly where we need to be. Acts of resistance can protect, sustain, and renew the things that are dear to us, that we believe create new life. Resistance is one way that we push back against forces that are doing damage, and it's also how we push back against old systems that are holding us back. As Unitarian Universalists, we have often been part of this kind of resistance as we respond to the suffering in the world around us. But that's not the kind of resistance I want to talk about today. There are other kinds of resistance, and we know them well, like the resistance we heard about in our Time for All Ages today, where Sylvia just won't take the garbage out. And it builds up and up and up until it swallows her whole. This kind of resistance keeps us from saying yes to life, yes to who we want to be, yes to the possibilities around us. And that's the kind of resistance we're focusing on today, the shadow side of resistance. And how do we recognize that resistance? Where does it come from? What is it trying to protect us from? And what do we do with it when it gets in the way of who we want to be or who we say we want to be? That's what we're exploring today. And I want to start with a story about a woman named Tiffany Owens Reed, who lives in Waco, Texas, and her journey with the shadow side of resistance. Tiffany is part of a nonprofit called Strong Towns, whose mission is to mitigate the damage done to our society by being in a suburban car-based world. Their mission is to shift us away from that suburban car-based development towards safe, interconnected, and livable communities. And where that suburban world can't be changed, to mitigate it, to change things, to create the kind of infrastructure that creates real community, where we are connected to each other. So it's no surprise that when Tiffany moved to Waco, the first thing she did was acquaint herself with the Waco Farmers Market, because it stands for everything she believes in. It supports local farmers, it supports local businesses, it brings people together out of our homes that separate us from each other so often, and it also leaves a smaller carbon footprint because it gets rid of all that travel, all that transportation we need for most of the foods we get. It also creates a third place. If that's a new term for you, third places are places that aren't work or home. Parks are third places. Public libraries are third places. Cafes, gyms, churches like this are third places. They are like neutral ground where people come together. Often multiple generations come together. You know, churches are one of the few places left that are multi-generational because we're so segregated by age as well. We're very powerful third places. There's often lots of conversation or sharing of some kind that's not about a transaction. It's not commercial. So third places give us a sense of home that is beyond our personal homes. It's a larger social or cultural home. And in Waco, just like here, third places are disappearing. We spend more and more of our time in our homes, in front of our entertainment centers, our computers, and always our phones, right? We shop online. We do a lot of things online that we used to do out in the world around people, especially in third places. Now, I don't want to be all down on being online. Did you know that almost half, and sometimes more than half of the people joining us in worship are joining us by Zoom? So whatever you see here, double it. That's how many people come to worship. The internet saved us during the pandemic. We wouldn't have survived as a congregation if it hadn't been for the internet. But it also separates us from each other. There really is nothing like bumping elbows with people, looking in their eyes, seeing their gait, their stance, how they sit, how they smile, sharing a cup of coffee. There's nothing like that. We need our third places as we become more and more isolated from each other. Some would say that this isolation is part of what fuels the divisions that are growing in this country. It's much easier to hate and whip up fear with people when you haven't looked in each other's eyes, haven't talked with each other, aren't sharing the same spaces. It's harder to turn someone into a devil when you're asking how someone raises the chickens that laid the eggs that you're considering taking home. Tiffany loved watching the farmers market. She loved watching the empty lot in downtown Waco transform into a third place, and she was looking for ways to make it stronger. And she came up with an idea to hold an organized bike ride ending at the market on a busy Saturday afternoon. And the manager loved the idea, and they came up with a plan to make it happen. Now, you would think that Tiffany would be on top of the world. This was exactly what she wanted. It's exactly what she believed in. But as she went home, she got what she calls an ick feeling. All of these doubts crept into her mind. Who did she think she was taking this on? What if she failed? Maybe it was a bad idea. Maybe it would crash and burn and everyone would be looking at her for the reason why. Tiffany was being pulled into the shadow side of resistance, even though her idea would help to create exactly what she believed in. Stephen Pressfield, in his book, The Art of War, writes about these ick feelings. Resistance, he writes, is a pernicious psychological force which, if uncontested, will undermine our most meaningful goals. Resistance shows up in a variety of ways: self-sabotage, imposter syndrome, self-doubt, perfectionism, anxiety, and procrastination. So what do all of these kinds of shadow sides of resistance look like? Self-sabotage means that we put things in the way of what we say we want to ruin any chance of success. And then we can say, look, it wouldn't have worked anyway. Imposter syndrome means that you feel like you've crashed a party where you don't belong. Like when you get your first job coming out of college, right? You feel like a total fake. And then you feel like a fraud. Are you ever going to match up? Self-doubt is when you really do have everything you need to do the thing you want to, but then you start putting yourself down. Perfectionism looks like not letting go of a project or a goal until it's perfect, which it never is, so you never have to let it go. It never gets done. And procrastination, you just don't start, which you're nervous about starting. Afraid of how bad you'll feel doing that thing, or maybe just hoping it will go away or resolve itself, except it doesn't. Things build up and up and up, and just like in a world that doesn't have any third places, you are left alone and isolated. I'm seeing a lot of nods in the room as people are recognizing their own forms of inner resistance. And why do we resist? William Chris Hobgood, in his book, Welcoming Resistance, says that resistance is a natural part of life. We resist because we're human. We're afraid. We're afraid of failing, afraid of losing what we have, afraid of being vulnerable, afraid of getting hurt, afraid of being sad or lost or angry, afraid of being afraid. We do this in our personal life, and we do this as groups, like in our families, in our relationships, at work, in our neighborhoods, and in a third place, like this church. Most of us don't change until it's too painful not to. This is called homeostasis. That's when you're drawn to protect what is, to go back to your comfort zone, even if it is hurting you. That's how strong resistance can be. So today, I want to explore these forms of resistance in light of what is taking most of the attention of this beloved community, which is the journey of selling this building and finding a new home. And the reason I want to explore this is because things are moving along. There is interest in our building, serious interest. And our moving team has been visiting possible sites, with things becoming clearer with every visit. And as we get further down this path, we have to know, right, that there are going to be moments of resistance, because that is what we do. It's normal to be anxious, to have doubts, to be afraid. And it will be important to be conscious of these feelings and to make important choices about what you do with them, both for yourself and for the good of the community. Otherwise, you will get knocked off course. And I want to say that if you're new to us or you're visiting and you think that this may not have anything to do with you now because I'm talking about this church, hang in there, because this story is all of our stories, no matter where you are. We just happen to be living it here and now. And we want to stay in a place of love, grace, and respect for each other here. It's really important to us. And that doesn't mean that everyone has to agree on the final decisions you're going to make. There's a saying in Unitarian Universalism that you don't have to believe alike to love alike. And usually this refers to what we believe about mystical things and transcendent things. But I don't think that's all it's good for. This idea of not having to believe alike to love alike is useful for us in this situation, because you don't have to fully agree about everything in order to move forward together in love as a beloved community. You just have to be able to live with the decisions that come from your democratic process and love each other while you live with the decisions. So let's put a few things on the table, just to be clear. The decision to move happened because it became too painful not to. Right? That homeostasis thing was always pulling us back. The discomfort of where you are now just became stronger than the natural human need to protect what is. And it took over a decade to make this decision. The mounting issues with the building, the changes in the community around us, the changes in our membership began to hurt more and more. And you're missing each other, as some of you can't get into this building. You're grieving people who left the church over the question of whether to stay or go. And there's also the pain of not being able to focus on all the things you really want to focus on, like social justice and action, being a presence in the community, opportunities for spiritual growth, because one more thing in the building needs attention. Case in point, our Christmas Eve service, which should be the quietest, peaceful, most moving, sentimental, feel-good service of the year, right? You come for the dim lights, the carols, the candles, the uplifting message. Instead, what was happening? Half of you were downstairs in the basement because the water main had frozen and burst, dealing with 4 inches of water in the basement. That was Christmas Eve. You have tried and tried to find ways to make it work here. And there may have been some procrastinating in the air, right? Putting it off, hoping the problems weren't as serious as they seemed, hoping to find some way for all of this to just work itself out. But it just didn't. And just like with Shel Silverstein's Sylvia Stout, things kept building and building, and the stress of all of this led to moments of real struggle and conflict. That hurt a lot of people. So the vote to move was a response to the increasing pain that you have been living with. But it's not just that, because if that's all it was, that wouldn't be enough to make this work, because then you'd just be running away without a sense of running to something. It's not just about what you're leaving, but about what you're hoping to move towards. And this vote reflected that you are hungry to be more, that you have something really important to offer the world, a message of deep love, acceptance and inclusion, a deep sense of generosity, a true and tender kindness, and a willingness to live life deeply. And I want you to remember this when you start getting anxious. There is something you really want to move forward to. And it's not fully formed. It probably won't be able to get fully formed until you do make the move, which means you actually have to have faith. Faith in that you will deepen and grow as a community because of this tremendous act of courage that you are working through right now. So another thing to watch out for in this process is self-doubt. When you've experienced the kind of pain that you have, when you've experienced a lot of loss, like you have, it is normal to have some feelings of low self-esteem and feeling bad about yourselves. Like, what's wrong with us? Why can't we just get it together? Are we crazy? We can't do this. We're not strong enough. Look at us. One of those losses, this is a big one, was having a staff member embezzle all your savings, almost $40,000 in savings. And when that happened, you didn't just lose money, you lost trust, sometimes with each other. And you've experienced the loss of members and the loss of ministers. And these kind of losses take their toll, and it will be normal to wonder if you are strong enough to do a move like this. Some of you may be having that quintessential imposter syndrome question, wondering, who do we think we are to pull off something like this? Courage and risk is for big churches with more money and lots of people. A small church like this, who do we think we are? How many of you have felt some version of that? And the answer is that you are strong enough because you are doing it. When I tell other Unitarian Universalists what you've chosen to do, their eyes widen. And I see respect in their eyes for your courage. There are a whole lot of churches, Unitarian Universalist or otherwise, that are slowly and not so slowly fading away, unable to move through inertia and self-doubt, and they're dying by the shovelful. But you're taking this risk, not just for yourselves, but for your liberal religious faith. And we all want you to be successful. Let me say to you from the bottom of your heart that the other churches in this area, Elliott Chapel, First Unitarian St. Louis, Emerson Chapel, they all want you to be successful. They're in your corner. You have what it takes. And I encourage you to find a way to remember this when you have doubts, when you have imposter syndrome, when you're tempted to sabotage it all and say, see, told you we can't do this. And what might sabotage look like? I've been thinking about this. It's good to be prepared so you won't be surprised and caught off guard. It happens. And before I go further, let me say I am not talking about intentional, malicious sabotage where someone wants to do harm, wants you all to fail. And I'm not talking about the divide between those who voted to leave and those who voted to go. Those who voted to go, you're just as capable of self-sabotage, just as capable of that inner stuff going on. I'm talking about unconscious, sometimes gut-wrenching types of sabotage that come from a place of fear and loss of control. Sabotage might look like selling your building and not allowing yourselves to use any of the profit towards investing in the future, socking it away so you can buy your own building someday. Of course you want to use that money responsibly, not squander it. But you do need to let that money work for you. Make sure you fully fund your move. Invest in yourselves. Invest in success. And by no means should you spend it all down, because that is also sabotage. But don't lock it away and go back to living on a shoestring budget. That is not a recipe for growth. That's a recipe for lingering and disappearing. Another form of sabotage, and I know I could be treading on tender ground here, but ministers got to do that sometimes. Got to put ourselves out there, but I've seen it in other congregations. Another form of sabotage is to cut back your pledge because you want to see how things work out before making a commitment. It's also a natural human thing, right? Some of you may be worried about getting invested and then getting hurt and being disappointed. I can't promise you you're not going to be hurt or disappointed in some way. There's no guarantees here. But what if you get attached, right? What if it doesn't work out like you hope it will? Lord knows there's been a lot of hurt around this issue, right? We can all agree on that. But I'm going to ask you to resist this with all that you have. The pledge drive is starting next month, and it's a really important pledge drive because it will set you up for your future. Don't deny your church anything during this time. Don't ask your leaders to make this happen and then hold back the resources for them to do that. This is the time to increase your pledge if you can. So I'm going to ask you to start thinking about what your level of support will be when the ask comes. I'm going to ask you to be as generous as you can with each other, because the church is you. And when you're with your pledge, it's you and your people. That's what you're doing. You're supporting the ones you love and yourself. Another thing to watch out for is perfectionism. Not one of the places we have looked at is perfect. They all have strengths and they all have challenges. And the best ones have more of the things you identified as priorities, but none have all of them. So the question isn't, is it perfect? But the question is it enough to do what you want? Does it have potential for growth? And I'm talking about growth in all its forms: spiritual growth, relational growth, intellectual growth, and yes, numeric growth, which comes when you focus on the first three, which are spiritual, relational, and intellectual growth. Will your future home help you to flourish and to nourish all the ways that you have become hungry for more, and that you have become hungry to be more? So don't look for perfection and then write off the move because it doesn't appear. There is no perfect here. You're looking for enough to build on for your new start. This is the thing about churches in the 21st century. Churches are third places, valuable third places, and we don't have as many third places anymore. Churches are closing every day. In fact, many of the churches we visited are eager to have us because they are also struggling and see this as an opportunity for them to be more. And what we're all learning, whether you're Christian or Unitarian Universalist or Jewish or Muslim or Hindu or any other religious body, is that there is less and less we can take for granted as religious institutions. We have to be intentional about existing. We have to be creative, take chances, try new things to stay relevant. So hold on to your values, treasure and nourish your relationships, deepen in your theology, trust in the transformative power of your faith, but everything else, it's transitory. Your congregation's hope of a new life depends on knowing what to hold on to and what to let go. And that is very hard work, but it's also exciting work that has the possibility of bringing new energy and hope and possibility. So in the days to come, I want you to hold onto these things. 1, yes, you are strong enough to do this. 2, no, you don't have to be a big church with lots of money to pull something like this off. 3, be generous with each other. Generous in spirit, generous in time, generous in trust, generous with your money, generous with your love. 4, be curious all the time, curious and open. 5, listen to each other carefully and care for each other fully. And finally, believe in yourself and the power of our liberal religious tradition. I close with the words of Leslie Takahashi that we used to open our service. Let us each feel ourselves part of the new that grows from the old in the spiraling unity of years. Amen and blessed be. Our closing hymn is Bob Dylan, The Times They Are Changing. I want to thank John Herndon for providing the guitar for us this morning.
Sorry, no, Herman.
Please rise in body or spirit.
Come gather round, people, whoever you are, and look down the waters around you that roll, and acceptance soon you'll be drenched to the bone. If your time to you is worth saving, then you better start swimming or sink like a stone, for the times they are a-changing. Come writers and critics, and keep your eyes on the and the too soon while the whales still extend, and there's no telling that they will, or the winds of the world will be later to win, for the times they are a-changing. Come senators, congressmen, please heed the call. Come stand in the doorway, don't block the hall. For the Egypt's earth will be healed with stone. There's a battle outside and it's raging. It'll soon shake your windows and make your walls. For the times they are a-changing. Come mothers and fathers throughout the land, and don't criticize what you can't understand. Your sons and your daughters are beyond your command, and your old road is rapidly aging. Please get out of the new one and you can for the times they are a-changing. The line it is drawn, the curse it is cast. The snow now will be later be fast, as the present now will see later to pass. The order is rapidly fading, and the first one is now will be later be last, for the times they are a-changing.
Please be seated. Every week, we take an offertory to support the many life-saving ministries of this congregation and its vision and its hopes. Let us be a generous people. Let us take this morning's offering. Let's bless this offertory with the following prayer. May this offering equip us to inspire love and seek justice. So now we're at the time for announcements. I have only one, and that is that the moving team is looking at a date to meet with you all and to present the findings of all the places that have been visiting. It will be in the next few weeks. A date has not yet been finalized, but please be on the lookout for that. Are there any other announcements? Jennifer. You're welcome. So, without thanking myself, let me say for the folks online, we had a scavenger hunt on Friday. It was a blast. Everyone had a great time. The kids had a great time and picked up lots of litter. Just part of the scavenger hunt to pick up as much litter as you could find while looking for mushrooms and ants and tree bark and dead branches and things like that. Are there any other announcements? Okay, so here are our closing words by Cynthia Landrum. We leave this gathered community, but we don't leave our connection, our concerns, our care for each other, our service to each other, to the world, and our faith continues until we are together again. Be strong, be well, be true, be loving. Please join me in extinguishing our chalice with the prayer we speak each week. The light of truth and meaning cannot be put out. We are the keepers of this flame until we meet again. And we have one final gift from Joy. Thank you so much, all of you, for coming today. Please join us for coffee and good conversation just through that door. Go in peace.